I'm Manny of the Waste, founder of Face Corp, veteran of the settlement wars, wasteland archivist, and the guy who keeps getting handed the keys to rooms that should have stayed locked. Let me start with a smell. Not blood, not rot, not even that sweet metal stink you get when a reactor's cooking off behind a wall. I'm talking about clean. A chemical clean that doesn't belong in a dead world. A sterile brightness, like somebody scrubbed a nightmare and left the nightmare anyway. That's how you know you're near it. Before you see the vats, before you read the logs, before you meet what came out the other side. And if you've been out here long enough, if you've walked the ruins and counted the bones, you learn one sentence the hard way. The green remembers. People like to blame the bombs for everything. That's comforting. One day, one firestorm, one line in history you can point to and say, there, that's when we broke. But FEV is different. FEV is not a moment. FEV is a habit, a process, a system, a corporate memo that learned how to breathe. So tonight, we don't just talk about how super mutants happen. We talk about why the smartest people in the old world looked at a disease and decided the solution was to rebuild the human body like a machine. We talk about the pan-immunity dream, the noble lie they told themselves at the start, and how fast that dream learned to wear a uniform. We talk about West Tek's clean rooms, Mariposa's locked doors, and Vault-Tec's smile. That smile that says, sure, come inside. We'll take care of you. Before the war, America was already sick. Not just with the new plague. That was the headline. That was the panic. The kind of sickness you can put on posters. But the deeper infection was fear. Fear of China, fear of scarcity, fear of losing the future. Fear that made men in suits decide morality was a luxury item, and they were out of stock. They called it the Pan-Immunity Project. Sounds like a charity. Sounds like hope. And for a little while, it was. The pitch was simple. If enemies are building viruses, you don't just build a vaccine. You make the human genome unfriendly terrain. You don't block the bullet. You change the skin so the bullet can't recognize what it's hitting. Some scientists put it in a line that survived the fire. Alter uninfected DNA so it's no longer susceptible to standard viral infection. That's the first step, you see. Not evil, just clever. And clever is how it starts. By 2075, the project birthed something with a name that sounds like a warning label. Batch 10-011, the first version that truly rewrote what it touched. They called it a variant. They called it pan-immunity. But then the numbers on the chart started climbing, and the suits started listening. Flatworms didn't just survive disease. They grew. Bigger mass, more resilience, more aggression. Then mice, rabbits, mammals, stronger, bolder, meaner. And in every graph, there's a moment the old world loved more than any miracle. The moment a weapon begins to look like an investment. West Tek didn't have to sell the military on it. They barely had to whisper. You show a general a creature that shrugs off infection, heals fast, hits harder, and you can almost see the new world forming in his eyes. Not a better world, a controlled one. Because FEV wasn't just protection, it was design. A virus with a shifting double helix, a thing that can be programmed, that can carry corrected patterns and overwrite the body like a corrupted holotape overwrites memory. Infectious evolution, some terminal calls it. That phrase makes people laugh sometimes, like it's a comic book tagline, until they realize the punchline is their own skin. Early 2076, the project stops being medical, stops being theoretical. The US military seizes it. and they moved the work to a place built for secrets, Mariposa Military Base. I've seen parts of Mariposa, not the whole thing. Nobody sees the whole thing and stays the same. You walk corridors where the paint still clings like it's stubborn. You find doors with locks that kept working long after the men behind them died. You find scorch marks where somebody tried to burn evidence. And then you find what they couldn't burn. Logs, schedules, intake forms. They didn't write kidnapping, they wrote volunteers. They didn't write human experimentation, they wrote trials. The old world loved euphemisms. Euphemisms are how monsters put on lab coats. Here's the part people repeat like it's a campfire legend. Captain Roger Maxson discovers what's happening. He sees the human experiments. He sees the bodies, the twisted failures, the successes that begged for death. The men who walked in uniform and came out as something else. And Maxson says, no, not later, not maybe, not let's file a complaint. No. So he mutinies. He deserts. He tries to contain it. That act, that one refusal, is a seed that becomes the Brotherhood of Steel. And isn't that something? One of the most powerful post-war factions, born not from victory, but from disgust. Born because a soldier looked at the future and decided it was too filthy to let live. Now let's talk about the myth people cling to. That the war happened and the virus died in the fire. No. The bombs didn't kill FEV. The bombs just turned the locks into suggestions. Because FEV is hardy. Radiation doesn't dissolve it the way it dissolves your teeth. It survives. It waits. It keeps its promise, even when the people who wrote the promise are ash. The vat sat. The canisters sat. The notes sat. And sooner or later, somebody always comes along with the same thought. What if we can use it right? That's the most dangerous sentence in human history. On the East Coast, you get stories about places like Huntersville, about crop programs and improvements, and government trucks showing up at night. Then the town gets sick. Skin changes. Hair falls, bodies swell, and the people who loved each other stop recognizing each other. And what crawls out of that isn't a new species. It's a receipt. Proof that the pre-war world spent lives like currency and then wrote down the profit. Snallygasters, Grafton's hulking mistakes, creatures that look like somebody tried to draw a nightmare with a broken hand. And the real horror is this. Those weren't accidents. Those were iterations. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. Manny, if FEV is so bad, why wasn't it everywhere? Why didn't it just blow across the wasteland like ash? Here's your mercy. Small, but real. Base form FEV isn't a casual wind-borne plague. It wants contact. It wants a needle. A vat, a mist in a locked room. It wants a hand on a lever. It wants intent. So FEV doesn't spread like weather. It spreads like a decision. And decisions can be made again. When the Great War hit, October 23rd, 2077, the world didn't just burn. It scattered. Facilities got struck. Labs got buried. Records got half melted into unreadable confessions. Some sites were hit so directly you'd swear somebody had a map. And maybe they did. Maybe in the last hours, every power on Earth looked at the other and thought, if they get the virus, we're finished. So they tried to deny it. But denial doesn't erase it. Denial just changes who finds it first. Post-war. The virus becomes a curse with many faces. The master on the West Coast finds a supply and decides he can end war by ending choice. The unity, he calls it, as if forced conversion is unity. He dips people. He turns them into hulking bodies and broken histories. Some come out sharp enough to speak. Most come out simplified, sterile, strong. And in that sterility is another quiet cruelty. FEV often steals the future. No children, no inheritance except violence. The master believed he was saving humanity. I've read enough logs to know. The best villains always do. Then you get the Enclave. If the master is a prophet of unity, the Enclave is a priesthood of purity. They look at mutation and see impurity. They look at survival and see contamination. They look at the wasteland and say, this doesn't count as America. And so they take FEV and try to tune it like a radio. One frequency that kills the wrong kind of human. Curling strains, selective death. They build monsters like Frank Horrigan, a super soldier you can't negotiate with, can't outrun, can't forget. And the twisted genius of it is that they wear sealed armor, so they can poison the world without tasting it themselves. That's the Enclave in one image. A man inside steel, declaring the air outside unworthy. Then there are the vaults. Ah, vaults. People still call them shelters. That word makes me laugh in the driest way. Because a shelter is where you go to be protected. A vault is where you go to be studied. Vault 87. Mist chambers. 10-day logs. Skin thickening into hide. Names turning into serial numbers. You read those terminals and you can almost hear the scientist telling himself, we're learning. We're learning. We're learning. Learning what? How much a person can lose and still breathe? And later, you get the Institute, down in the Commonwealth, playing the same song with a new instrument. They kidnap wastelanders. They dip them. They let them loose when they become inconvenient. Because FEV is the one pre-war invention that keeps reproducing itself through human desire. You don't need the original government program. You just need one lab, one vial, one genius with a hole where conscience should be. Now, you asked me for the pre-war origins, but I can't talk about origins without talking about the darkest part. Not the virus, not the VATS, not even the screams. The darkest part is that, pre-war, there were people who planned to keep this going after the bombs. They didn't see apocalypse as failure. They saw it as a schedule, a clean slate, a laboratory the size of a continent. Vault-Tec executives, the kind of people who smile while they sell you a coffin, had their own interest in what West Tek built. In some versions of the story, a man like Bud Askins is the hinge. Scientist turned executive, research turned investment pitch. A Phase 2. A future where vault populations aren't citizens, they're inventory. And the irony? They sold vaults as salvation from the end of the world, while quietly packing a second end inside the walls. So what is FEV, really? It's not just a virus, it's a philosophy. That humanity is a draft, that suffering is acceptable if the numbers go up, that bodies are raw material, and the future belongs to whoever can edit the genome fastest. That's why it keeps coming back, because every era produces someone who thinks, this time, I'll do it right. And out here, in the waste, I've seen what right looks like. A super mutant holding a broken toy like it's sacred because the mind inside the muscle still remembers being small. A nightkin muttering to ghosts because stealth tech and mutated nerves made reality optional. A behemoth that never stopped growing because a strain didn't know when to stop correcting. Centaurs, don't get me started. A shape so wrong you can't decide what part of it is suffering first. And I've seen the other side too. Humans who hunt them for sport. Humans who fear them without understanding. Humans who create them and then pretend they didn't. So here's my warning, as an engineer and an archivist. FEV is not a relic. FEV is a tool, and tools don't die. Tools wait for hands. If you find a sealed lab door with a clean chemical smell behind it, if you see green fluid in intact glass, if you hear someone say phase 2 like it's progress, you do not negotiate, you do not sample, you do not get curious. You back away. You weld it shut. You bury it in concrete and salt. You burn the notes. Because the green remembers. And the worst part? Sometimes, so do we. We remember enough to be tempted. We remember enough to think we can control it. We remember enough to repeat it. That's why FaceCorp exists. That's why I keep recording these entries. Not to scare you, to keep you from becoming a footnote in somebody else's breakthrough. So I'll leave you with a question that never stops biting. If the bombs hadn't fallen, if the world had staggered on another year, another decade, would FEV have saved us? Or would it have finished the job, quietly, in clean rooms, with polite paperwork and a smile? Either way, the green remembers. And out here, so should you.
Archive node reconnecting. FaceCorp terminal online.
Well, you made it to the end, Wastelander. And I want to thank you for walking this dusty road with me. These stories, they live because you keep listening, because you care, because the wasteland still has folks like you out there. If you've got a topic you want me to dig into next, a vault, a faction, a legend, a cover-up, send it my way. FaceCorp is always monitoring incoming requests. And hey, if you enjoyed this archive entry, press that like button. It keeps the terminal lights on. And if you want more stories from the ruins, go on and subscribe. Your support helps FaceCorp recover and preserve every last fragment of our shattered world.
Loading next recommended archive file. File located. Displaying now.
It's right there on your screen. Go on. Open it. I'll meet you inside.